The detention level of the Galactic Council enforcement ship Righteous Fury hummed with the constant vibration of engines that had traveled between stars for over 3 decades. Commander Zexay had walked these corridors thousands of times, but today something felt different. Today the usual sounds of the ship seemed muted, as if the very metal around them was holding its breath. "The human has been silent for 6 rotations now," reported Security Chief Vorthak, his forearms gesturing nervously as they approached the observation deck overlooking the detention cells. Not a single word, no demands, no threats, no bargaining attempts. Nothing. Zexhai's scaled hide rippled with unease. In 40 years of service to the Council, she had processed hundreds of criminals, pirates, and rebels. Humans in particular were known for their constant chatter, their endless attempts to negotiate or argue their way out of captivity. This silence was unprecedented and deeply unsettling. "What about the other prisoner?" she asked, referring to the small creature they had found 3 days earlier, drifting in a damaged escape pod near the border of Confederation space. Vorthak's mandibles clicked together in what passed for a grimace among his species. "Still the same.
Any approach to its cell results in violent defensive behavior.
Meleth has tried everything short of sedation, but even the medical drones trigger an attack response." They reached the observation deck, and Zexhai looked down into the detention bay. 2 cells faced each other across a narrow corridor, both containing beings that had, in their own ways, defied everything the Galactic Council understood about civilized behavior. In the left cell, a small humanoid creature no larger than a juvenile Cretai huddled in the corner farthest from the energy barrier. Its species was unknown to their databases, but its behavior spoke of trauma so deep that even the ship's advanced psychological scanners couldn't penetrate the walls of fear and rage it had built around itself. When they had first brought it aboard, it had nearly killed 2 security officers with improvised weapons made from pieces of its own clothing. Now it simply crouched, watching everything with eyes that held the kind of wariness that came from expecting pain from every interaction. In the right cell sat the human. He was unremarkable by human standards, according to their files. Medium height, dark hair beginning to show gray at the temples, features that spoke of Earth's European genetic heritage. He wore the standard-issue detention uniform, orange fabric that somehow looked almost dignified on his frame, but it was his posture that drew Zexhai's attention and held it. The human sat cross-legged on the narrow bed, back straight, hands resting loosely on his knees. His eyes were closed, but there was nothing relaxed about his stillness. This was the kind of motionless waiting that predators displayed just before they struck. Yet there was something else, something that made Zexhai's veteran instincts whisper warnings she couldn't quite understand. "He has not moved from that position in 4 hours, Vorthak observed. Before that, he spent 2 hours standing perfectly still by the energy barrier, just watching the corridor. No pacing, no fidgeting, no signs of anxiety or claustrophobia. And before that, he was watching the other prisoner." Zexhai's secondary heart skipped a beat. The human had been watching the creature that no one could approach, the being that attacked anything that came within 3 meters of its cell. Watching how? Not with the curiosity most beings show when encountering an unknown species. More like Vorthak struggled with the comparison. Like a hunter studying prey, but also like a prey animal studying a predator. It was difficult to interpret. Through the transparent aluminum of the observation deck, Zexhai could see both cells clearly. The unknown creature was pressed against the far wall, its large eyes fixed on something beyond the range of the surveillance cameras. Following its gaze, she realized it was looking directly at the human. Dr. Malith theorized that the creature might be responding to the human's presence, Vorthak continued. "Its stress indicators have been fluctuating in ways that don't match its usual patterns. Show me the security recordings from when the human first arrived." The wall display flickered to life, showing the detention bay from 3 days earlier. Zexhai watched as the human was escorted into his cell by 4 heavily armed guards. Standard procedure for any human, given their species' reputation for violence and unpredictability. The moment the energy barrier activated, sealing him inside, something interesting happened. The human didn't test the barrier, didn't examine his surroundings, didn't even acknowledge the guards as they departed. Instead, he had turned immediately toward the opposite cell, where the creature was engaged in its usual aggressive display. For several minutes, the 2 beings had simply looked at each other across the corridor. Then slowly, the creature's aggressive posturing had begun to fade. Its snarls grew quieter, its movements less frantic. By the time an hour had passed, it was simply sitting, much as the human was now, watching. "Fascinating," Zexay murmured. "Run a full behavioral analysis on both subjects. I want to know everything about their interaction patterns." "Commander," came a voice from behind them. "Doctor..." Melith approached, her Kretai features showing the stress lines that came from dealing with patients she couldn't treat. I strongly recommend that we separate these prisoners. The unknown creature's psychological profile suggests that any form of social bonding could destabilize its already fragile mental state. And what does your analysis suggest about the human psychological state? Zexay asked. Dr. Melith's feathers ruffled with uncertainty. That's the problem, Commander. I can't get a clear reading on the human at all. His brain activity shows patterns I've never seen before in any species. He's not sleeping, but he's not awake in any conventional sense either. His stress hormones are elevated, but not in a way that indicates fear or anxiety. It's as if he's maintaining a state of controlled readiness that shouldn't be sustainable for more than a few minutes at a time. Controlled readiness for what? I have no idea. Zexai looked down at the human again. He hadn't moved, hadn't even opened his eyes, but something about his stillness had changed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but her predator instincts were screaming that he was now aware of being observed. Commander, Vorthax said urgently, the creature is moving. Indeed, the small being in the opposite cell was rising to its feet for the first time since they had brought it aboard. Its movements were cautious, almost ritualistic as it approached the energy barrier that separated it from the corridor. For 3 days, any approach to that barrier had triggered violent defensive behavior. Now, it moved with purpose, stopping just short of the crackling energy field. The human's eyes opened. Zexai felt a chill run through her scaled hide as she watched the two beings regard each other across the narrow space. There was something happening here that went beyond simple curiosity or even recognition. This was communication of a kind that didn't require words or gestures or any of the conventional methods that civilized species use to interact. Dr. Melith, she said quietly, I want you to monitor both subjects continuously. If anything changes in their behavior or physiology, I want to know immediately. Commander, I really think we should... That was an order, Doctor. As the medical officer departed with obvious reluctance, Zexai remained at the observation deck, watching the silent communication taking place below. The human had shifted position slightly, moving from his meditation posture to sit with his back against the wall, facing the opposite cell directly. The creature had done the same, settling into a crouch that kept its eyes on the human while maintaining enough distance from the barrier to avoid triggering its defensive reflexes. Sir, Vorthax said softly, the Council's standing orders regarding humans are quite specific. We're supposed to deliver them to the processing station within 48 hours of capture. I'm aware of the orders, Security Chief. We're already overdue by 18 hours. Zexai's claws extended briefly, a sign of stress that she quickly suppressed. The Galactic Council's policy regarding humans was one of the few aspects of her job that troubled her professional conscience. Since the fall of Earth, humanity had been classified as a rogue species, too dangerous to be allowed free rein in civilized space. Any human found outside the designated containment zones was to be captured and processed through the rehabilitation centers. She had seen the reports from those centers. She knew what rehabilitation really meant. The human hasn't actually committed any crimes, she said carefully. He was found in a stolen ship, Commander. That constitutes piracy under Council law. A damaged ship that was already listed as salvage. And our investigation hasn't proven he was the one who stole it originally. These were thin excuses, and they both knew it. The Council's justice system wasn't particularly interested in proof where humans were concerned. Commander, Vorthax said, his voice carrying the weight of personal respect despite his official concern, your career has been exemplary. Don't let sentiment compromise your record. Sentiment. Is that what this was? Zexai looked down at the human again, noting the way his presence seemed to calm the traumatized creature across from him. In 40 years of service, she had learned to trust her instincts about people, regardless of their species. And her instincts were telling her that this human was not the monster the Council's propaganda painted his kind to be. 18 hours won't make any difference to the processing center, she said finally. But it might make a difference to our understanding of what's happening here. Vorthax's mandibles clicked together again, but he didn't argue. Professional loyalty ran both ways, and Zexai had earned his trust through decades of competent command. Below them, the two prisoners continued their silent vigil. The human had closed his eyes again, but his breathing remained shallow and controlled. The creature's stress indicators, according to the displays on Vorthax's datapad, were lower than they had been since it was brought aboard. Run a deep scan on both of them, Zexai ordered. I want to know everything about their species, their backgrounds, and their capabilities, and I want to know why a traumatized being that attacks everything else seems to find comfort in the presence of a human. As the hours passed and the ship continued its journey through the star lanes, word of the unusual situation in detention began to spread through the crew. The righteous fury had a complement of over 200 beings representing 17 different species, and while interspecies cooperation was the foundation of galactic civilization, it was rare for such cooperation to extend beyond professional necessity. The ship's anthropologist, Dr. Geo versus Kelos, was the first to request permission to observe the prisoners. His study of human behavior had been limited to archived recordings and second-hand reports since live specimens were rarely available for examination. But "I'm seeing challenges everything we think we know about human psychology," he reported to Commander HFY in her ready room 6 hours later. "The subject appears to be maintaining a state of meditation that requires extraordinary mental discipline. But more importantly, he's demonstrating clear awareness of the other prisoner's emotional state. Explain." Dr. Kelos activated a holographic display showing brainwave patterns from both prisoners. Notice the synchronization in their neural activity. The human's patterns show a deliberate dampening of stress responses, while the creature's patterns show a corresponding decrease in fear and aggression indicators. It's as if the human is broadcasting calm and the creature is responding to it. "That's impossible. Humans don't have telepathic abilities." "No, Commander, but they do have something else that might be just as remarkable." Dr. Kelos highlighted specific portions of the brainwave data. "Humans appear to have evolved extraordinary empathic sensitivity. Not true telepathy, but an ability to read and respond to subtle emotional and biological cues that most species miss entirely." Zexai studied the data with growing fascination. "You're suggesting the human can sense the creature's emotional state?" "I'm suggesting he can sense it, understand it, and deliberately project behaviors that will have a calming effect. It's a level of emotional intelligence that borders on the supernatural. And the creature is responding to genuine compassion for the first time since we brought it aboard. Its brain chemistry is already showing signs of healing from whatever trauma it experienced before we found it. The implications were staggering. If humans possessed this level of natural empathic ability, it cast their entire species in a completely different light. The Council's propaganda portrayed them as violent, unpredictable savages who posed a threat to galactic civilization. But what if their apparent aggression was actually a response to being constantly misunderstood and mistreated? Dr. Kelos, I want you to compile a full report on your findings. Include everything: the behavioral analysis, the neurological data, your theoretical conclusions about human empathic abilities. Commander, if I may ask, what do you intend to do with this information? Zexai looked out the viewport at the stars streaming past, each one representing a world where the Council's version of justice was considered absolute and unquestionable. I'm going to make some very powerful people very uncomfortable with their assumptions. That evening, as the ship's artificial day cycle entered its rest period, Dr. Melith made an unexpected discovery. The creature, which had shown no interest in food since being brought aboard, had finally eaten. Not the nutritional supplements they had been providing, but something else entirely. "The human has been sharing his rations," she reported to the commander. "Somehow, he's been getting food to the creature across the corridor. This should have been impossible." The energy barriers were designed to prevent any physical contact between prisoners, and surveillance showed no evidence of any such transfer taking place. Yet analysis of the creature's digestive system confirmed that it had consumed human food. "Show me the security recordings again," Zexahai ordered. They watched hours of footage showing the human sitting in his cell, eating his meals in the same meditative posture he maintained for everything else. The creature remained in its corner, watching, but never approaching the barrier. There was no visible interaction between them. "Computer, analyze all recordings for any objects crossing the barrier between detention cells 3 and 4. Analysis complete. No objects detected crossing the barrier. Analyze for any breaks or fluctuations in barrier integrity. Analysis complete. No integrity failures detected." Dr. Melith's feathers were standing on end with confusion. "Commander, this is physically impossible. The barriers cannot be circumvented without triggering multiple alarm systems, and yet the creature has eaten." "Perhaps we should question the human directly," suggested Dr. Kelos, who had remained to observe this latest development. Zexai considered this. In 3 days, no one had attempted to communicate with either prisoner. Standard procedure called for isolation during the transport phase, but these were hardly standard circumstances. "Very well. Prepare an interview chamber. I want to speak with the human." 20 minutes later, Zexahai found herself face-to-face with a member of the species her government had declared irredeemably dangerous. The human sat across from her in the small interview room, his hands resting calmly on the table between them. Up close, she could see details that the surveillance cameras missed. The fine lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and pain, the careful way he held himself that suggested readiness for violence, but also deep exhaustion. "My name is Commander Zexhai," she began. "You have been aboard this vessel for 3 days, but you haven't told us who you are." The human studied her for several moments before speaking. When he did, his voice was lower than she had expected, carrying an accent she couldn't place. "Marcus Chen," he said simply. "Are you a citizen of the former Earth territories?" "I was." "The ship you were found in was reported stolen from the Kepler station 6 months ago. It was abandoned. The crew fled when pirates attacked. I found it drifting and used it to escape." His answers were direct, free of the deception indicators that usually characterized criminal testimony. More importantly, they were delivered without any of the defensive anger that typically marked human responses to authority questioning. "Our records show that you have no legal identity in any current database. As far as the Galactic Council is concerned, you don't exist." "As far as the Galactic Council is concerned, none of my people exist anymore." There was no bitterness in his voice, just a statement of fact that somehow made it more damning than any accusation could have been. "Mr. Chen, I need to ask you about the other prisoner. Our medical staff has observed some unusual interactions between you." For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Not fear or guilt, but something deeper and more complex. "She's been hurt," he said quietly.
Badly, by people who were supposed to protect her.
"You can determine this just by observation. You learn to recognize the signs when you've carried them yourself." The simple honesty of this statement hit Zex's eye like a physical blow. She had spent her career dealing with criminals, rebels, and pirates, but she had never met anyone who spoke about trauma with such matter-of-fact acceptance. "How have you been getting food to her?" Marcus looked genuinely puzzled. "I'm sorry? Our medical scans show that she has consumed human food." "Since you're in separate cells, this should be impossible." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You mean she's finally eating? That's good." "She was starting to worry me. Mr. Chen, you haven't answered my question." "Because I don't understand it. I eat my food in my cell. If she's eating something, it isn't coming from me." The confusion in his voice was genuine, according to every deception indicator Zexhai had ever learned to recognize. Either he was a master manipulator, capable of fooling advanced alien psychology, or he was telling the truth about not knowing how the food transfer was occurring. "Tell me about your people," she said, changing approaches. "What do you want to know?" "The Council's records describe humans as inherently violent and unpredictable, yet you've shown remarkable calm under circumstances that would drive most beings to desperation." Marcus was quiet for a long time, and when he spoke, his words carried the weight of profound sadness. "We were a young species when we met the galaxy, eager to learn to join the community of worlds. We made mistakes, but we were trying." He paused, looking down at his hands. "When the first colonies were attacked, we defended ourselves. When our people were enslaved, we fought back. When our homeworld was bombed, we did what any species would do. We tried to survive. The official reports state that humans initiated hostilities. The official reports say a lot of things." His voice remained steady, but Zexhai could see the pain in his eyes. "History is written by the winners, Commander, and we definitely didn't win. Do you hate us? The species that destroyed your civilization?" Marcus looked up at her directly, and she was surprised by what she saw in his face. Not hatred, not anger, but something that looked almost like pity. "Hate is a luxury I can't afford," he said. "It takes too much energy, and there are more important things to focus on." Such as a frightened child in the cell across from mine who needs to know that not everyone in this universe wants to hurt her. Child. He had called the unknown creature a child. Dr. Meleth's examination had been unable to determine the creature's age due to the unknown species parameters, but Marcus spoke with certainty. "How do you know she's a child?" "The same way you know when any child is scared. She may look different from human children, but fear is fear. Pain is pain, and loneliness." He trailed off, then looked back up at her. "Loneliness is a language every thinking being understands." Commander Zexhai left the interview room with more questions than answers and a growing certainty that everything her government had told her about humans was either incomplete or deliberately false. As she walked back to her quarters, she passed the observation deck overlooking the detention bay. The human, Marcus Chen, was back in his cell, sitting in his characteristic meditation position. But now she understood what she was really looking at. This wasn't the controlled readiness of a predator waiting to strike. This was the disciplined calm of someone who had learned to carry unbearable pain without letting it destroy him. and across the corridor the small creature that her crew had labeled as violently unstable was curled up in what looked like the first peaceful sleep she had managed since coming aboard. Tomorrow they would reach the processing station. Tomorrow she would be required to hand Marcus Chen over to authorities, who would ensure he never had the opportunity to show this kind of compassion to anyone ever again. Tonight, she had 18 hours to decide whether she was a commander in the Galactic Council Navy or someone who still believed that mercy was more important than following orders. Commander Zexhai stood before the massive viewport in her private quarters, watching the stars wheel slowly past as the Righteous Fury maintained course toward Processing Station Delta 7. In 6 hours, they would arrive at their destination. In 6 hours, she would be expected to transfer Marcus Chen to the Council's rehabilitation specialists. The term rehabilitation was a masterpiece of bureaucratic euphemism. What actually happened at the processing stations was systematic memory modification designed to turn humans into docile, productive members of galactic society. The process had a 93% success rate, according to official statistics. What those statistics didn't mention was that success was measured by compliance, not by any meaningful definition of mental health or personal autonomy. Her personal communicator chimed with an urgent message from Dr. Melith. The medical officer's report was brief but alarming. Both prisoners were showing significant physiological changes. The creature's stress hormones had dropped to normal levels for the first time since being brought aboard, while the human's brain activity was displaying patterns that defied every known model of consciousness. Zexhai made her way back to the detention level, where she found Dr. Melith and Dr. Kellos huddled over displays showing real-time biometric data from both cells. Commander, Dr. Melith began without preamble. I need to recommend immediate medical intervention for the human prisoner. Explain. His neurological patterns are unlike anything in our medical databases. He appears to be maintaining a state of consciousness that shouldn't be sustainable by any known biological parameters. His brain is consuming energy at twice the normal rate, but his body shows no signs of fatigue or stress. Dr. Kellos activated a three-dimensional hologram showing Marcus Chen's brain activity. More remarkably, his neural patterns are synchronizing with those of the creature across from him. It's as if he's deliberately matching her brainwave frequencies to provide some form of psychological stability. That's impossible, Zexhai said, but even as the words left her mouth, she was remembering Marcus's simple statement, "You learn to recognize the signs when you've carried them yourself." Commander, Melith continued, if this synchronization is deliberate, it represents a level of conscious control over autonomic nervous system functions that borders on the miraculous, but the energy cost is enormous. He can't maintain this indefinitely. How long can he sustain it? Based on current metabolic indicators, perhaps another day. Maybe 2 if he's exceptionally resilient. After that, his body will begin shutting down non-essential systems to preserve brain function. Zexhai looked down through the observation deck's transparent aluminum at the scene below. Marcus sat in his familiar meditative position, back straight, breathing controlled. To any casual observer, he appeared completely relaxed. Only the sophisticated medical scanners revealed the tremendous effort he was expending to maintain his calm demeanor. Across from him, the creature, the child, as Marcus had called her, was engaged in behavior that Dr. Melith's staff had never seen before. She was building something. What is she doing? Zexhai asked. She's been manipulating the fabric of her detention uniform, Dr. Kellos reported. At first we thought she was preparing another improvised weapon, but the pattern suggests something else entirely. The small being was weaving strands of fiber into an intricate pattern. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic, and there was something hypnotic about the way her fingers worked the material. Whatever she was creating, it required enormous concentration and considerable skill. It's some form of artwork, Dr. Kellos continued. The pattern appears to have cultural significance, though without knowing her species, we can't interpret its meaning. Zexhai watched the creature work, noting how her posture had changed over the past few hours. The defensive crouch had given way to something that looked almost like contentment. For the first time since being brought aboard, she seemed genuinely calm. The synchronization between their neural patterns is strongest when she's engaged in this activity, Dr. Melith added. It's as if the human is providing a stabilizing influence that allows her to access memories or skills the trauma had previously blocked. Doctor, in your professional opinion, is the human's behavior voluntarily controlled? Dr. Melith's feathers rustled with uncertainty.
I would have said no a week ago.
Everything we know about neurology suggests that this level of conscious control should be impossible, but the evidence is undeniable. He is deliberately modulating his own brain chemistry to produce a calming effect on another being. Why would someone do that at such enormous personal cost? I don't know, Commander. but I've been studying the psychological profiles of humans for years, and I'm beginning to think we've fundamentally misunderstood their species. Zex's communicator chimed again. This time it was Security Chief Vorthak requesting her immediate presence in the ship's communication center. With a last look at the two prisoners, she made her way to the bridge. "Commander," Vorthak greeted her with obvious tension, "we've received a priority communication from Galactic Council headquarters. They're specifically asking about our human prisoner." This was unusual. Individual prisoner transfers rarely warranted attention from Council headquarters, unless something significant was involved. "Put it through to my ready room," she ordered. 5 minutes later, she was facing the blue-tinged holographic image of Counselor Vexstar, one of the highest-ranking officials in the Council's Justice Ministry. His reptilian features showed the kind of cold calculation that had made him legendary for his efficiency in managing the human problem. "Commander Zexhai," he began without pleasantries, "our records indicate that you have in your custody a human designated as Marcus Chen. This individual is of particular interest to the Council." "May I ask why, Counselor?" "Chen was present during the evacuation of the Tau Ceti colony before its pacification. Intelligence suggests he may have information about remaining human resistance cells." Pacification. Another euphemism for what had actually been the systematic extermination of one of humanity's last remaining colonies. Zexi had read the classified reports. The Tau Ceti colony had been entirely civilian, focused on agricultural research. There had been no military installations, no weapons manufacturing, nothing that could justify the level of force that had been used. "Counselor, my initial interrogation suggested that the prisoner is a refugee, not a resistance operative." "Your initial interrogation was not conducted using approved techniques," Vexstar replied coldly. "The prisoner will be transferred directly to Enhancement Facility Omega upon your arrival at Processing Station Delta 7. He will undergo immediate intensive interrogation." Enhancement Facility Omega. Even Zexai, with her high-level security clearance, had only heard whispers about Omega. It was where prisoners went when the Council needed information quickly and wasn't particularly concerned about their survival. "Counselor, the prisoner has been cooperative throughout detention. Standard processing procedures should be sufficient." "Commander," Vexstar's voice carried a warning that made Zexhai's scales ripple with instinctive fear, "are you questioning the Council's judgment regarding security matters?" "No, Counselor. I was merely suggesting that enhanced interrogation might not be necessary in this case."
The necessity has already been determined. You will deliver the prisoner to Station Delta.
7 as ordered. Any deviation from these instructions will be considered an act of insubordination. The hologram flickered off, leaving Zexhai alone with the knowledge that she was about to deliver a man who had shown extraordinary compassion to a certain death. Because that's what Omega meant. Prisoners who went to Enhancement Facility Omega didn't come back. She returned to the observation deck where Dr. Huey Melith was documenting the latest developments in the prisoner's behavior. The creature had completed whatever she was building and was now holding it up toward Marcus's cell. From this angle, Zexhai could see that it was a complex geometric pattern woven from fabric strands, displaying an intricate beauty that spoke of cultural traditions stretching back generations. Marcus had opened his eyes and was looking directly at the artwork. Even from the observation deck, Zexhai could see his smile. It was the first genuine expression of happiness she had seen from him since he came aboard. "Dr. Melith," she said quietly, "in your professional opinion, what would happen to the creature if we remove the human?" Based on her previous behavioral patterns, she would likely regress to her original traumatized state within hours. The neural pathways that are currently allowing her to access positive memories and behaviors are dependent on the stabilizing influence he's providing. And if he continues to provide that influence much longer, he'll die from the metabolic strain. Zexhai closed her eyes, feeling the weight of command in ways that her academy training had never prepared her for. Marcus Chen was going to die regardless of what she did. The only question was whether it would be slowly from self-sacrifice or quickly in an interrogation chamber. And either way, the creature he was trying to help would return to the terrified, violent state they had found her in. "Commander," Dr. Kellos said hesitantly, "there might be another option." "Explain." "The ship's database contains detailed files on several uninhabited systems in this sector. Colony worlds that were abandoned during the border wars and never resettled. If our navigation system were to develop a malfunction that forced us to drop out of warp for repairs, you're suggesting we abandon ship protocols and allow prisoners to escape? I'm suggesting that sometimes navigation malfunctions occur at convenient times." Zexhai looked at him sharply. Kellis had served on her ship for 8 years, and she had never known him to suggest anything that violated regulations. The fact that he was doing so now spoke volumes about how profoundly the situation with Marcus and the creature had affected the crew. Dr. Kellos, what you're describing would be considered treason by the Council. Yes, Commander, it would. And you're prepared to risk your career, your freedom, and your life on behalf of 2 prisoners you've known for 3 days? Dr. Kellos was quiet for a moment, then gestured toward the detention bay below. Commander, in 40 years of studying sapient behavior, I've never encountered anything like what that human is doing. He's literally dying to provide comfort to a traumatized child from a species he's never seen before. He's doing it without any hope of reward, without any chance that it will improve his own situation. And if we let the Council destroy someone capable of that level of selfless compassion, what does that say about us? What does it say about everything we claim to represent? Before Zexakai could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Emergency lights bathed the corridors in red, and the automated voice of the ship's computer began announcing a critical malfunction in the primary navigation array. Security Chief Vorthak's voice crackled over the intercom. All senior staff to the bridge immediately. We're dropping out of warp for emergency repairs. Zexai looked at Dr. Kellos with new understanding. How long will these repairs take, Doctor? Navigation malfunctions can be quite complex, Commander. Could take anywhere from 12 to 72 hours to resolve. And during that time, ship security will be focused on external threats rather than internal containment? Standard protocol during emergency repairs, yes. Zexai activated her communicator. Security Chief Vorthak, this is the Commander. Once we've dropped out of warp and established a defensive perimeter, I want you to conduct a full review of all detention protocols. Make sure we're prepared for any contingencies. Understood, Commander. She looked down at the detention bay one more time. Marcus was still sitting in meditation, his face showing the strain of his continued efforts to maintain calm. The creature was holding her artwork, turning it slowly in the light from the corridor. They both seemed unaware that their world was about to change dramatically. Dr. Melith, Zex's AI said, I want you to prepare emergency medical supplies. Include everything necessary for treating trauma, malnutrition, and exhaustion. Commander, emergency repairs can be dangerous. We should be prepared for casualties. As she walked toward the bridge, Zexai felt a strange lightness in her chest. For the first time in months, she was making a decision based on what was right rather than what was ordered. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The bridge was chaos when she arrived. The main view screen showed the swirling colors of normal space as the ship dropped out of warp. Stars that had been streaks of light now resolved into distinct points, and in the distance, she could see the pale glow of an orange star surrounded by several small planets. Report, she ordered. Navigation array is completely offline, reported her chief engineer, a multi-armed Xerian named Korith. The quantum processors are showing cascade failures across multiple subsystems. I'll need at least 20 hours to fabricate replacement components. Are we in any immediate danger? No, Commander. We're in stable orbit around the outer planet of the system. All other systems are functioning normally. Zexai nodded, fighting to keep her expression neutral. Very good. Initiate standard emergency protocols. I want continuous sensor sweeps of the surrounding area and all departments on standby. Commander, Vorthak said quietly, approaching her command chair. This is an uncharted system. There could be any number of threats. Then we'd better make sure our security teams are properly deployed. I want patrols on every level, with particular attention to critical systems. What about the detention bay? Zexai looked at her security chief, noting the intelligence in his eyes. Vorthak was no fool. He understood exactly what was happening and why. The detention bay has been secure for 3 days, she said carefully. I'm sure it will remain so during our repairs. Of course, Commander. I'll make sure the security teams are concentrated on the most critical areas. 18 hours later, Dr. Melith discovered that both detention cells were empty. The energy barriers had been deactivated from the central security console, apparently during a routine systems check. The prisoners had simply walked out. A comprehensive search of the ship revealed no trace of them. It was as if Marcus Chen and the creature had simply vanished. Commander Zexai listened to the reports with appropriate concern and ordered a full investigation. She noted for the official record that emergency repairs had stretched security resources to their limits and that the prisoners had apparently taken advantage of this distraction to escape. She did not mention the emergency supplies that had gone missing from the medical bay. She did not mention the small shuttle that was no longer in its designated bay. And she certainly did not mention the fact that the shuttle's navigation system had been programmed with coordinates for the habitable planet they were currently orbiting. "Commander," Dr. Nelith reported privately, "I detected 2 human life designs on the planet's surface approximately 6 hours ago. The readings suggested that both individuals were alive and in stable condition." "Both individuals, Doctor?" "Yes, Commander. Apparently the creature species has a biology similar enough to humans that our medical scanners read them as the same life form." Zexai nodded solemnly. "Make a note in your medical log that the unknown creature species should be classified as potentially human-compatible. That might be important information for future encounters." The repairs to the navigation system took exactly 70 minutes, 1 hour, and 47 minutes. When the Righteous Fury finally resumed course toward Processing Station Delta 7, they carried a report detailing the escape of 2 prisoners during an emergency situation. Security Chief Vorthak's investigation concluded that the escape had been possible only due to the extraordinary circumstances of the navigation malfunction. Commander Zexai submitted her report to the Galactic Council with appropriate regret, and recommended that future detention protocols include additional safeguards for emergency situations. Counselor Vexstar responded with predictable anger, but there was little he could do. The escape had occurred in an uncharted system, with no way to predict where the escapees might have gone. A search mission would be prohibitively expensive and unlikely to succeed. Marcus Chen was officially listed as a fugitive. The creature was listed as an unknown entity of potential intelligence. Both files were marked for priority capture if they were ever encountered again. Dr. Melith, Dr. Kellos, and Security Chief Vorthak all submitted reports supporting the official version of events. No one mentioned the subtle navigation programming that had guided their ship to a system with a habitable planet. No one mentioned the medical supplies that had been carefully packaged for surface survival. And no one mentioned the fact that the planet below showed signs of abandoned colonial infrastructure that could provide shelter for refugees. 3 months later, Commander Zexahai received a coded transmission on a frequency that only her ship monitored. It contained no words, just a simple mathematical sequence that repeated 3 times before cutting off. She recognized the sequence. It was the Fibonacci progression, a mathematical concept that humans had been particularly fond of using in their art and architecture. The fact that someone was broadcasting it from the planet they had orbited during their repairs suggested that Marcus and the creature were not only alive, but thriving. Zexai deleted the transmission from her ship's logs and continued on her patrol route, but for the first time in her career, she found herself hoping that she would never be ordered to return to that particular system. In the vast emptiness between the stars, the Righteous Fury continued its mission of enforcing galactic order, but its crew now carried the knowledge that sometimes the most important duty was knowing when not to follow orders. And on a small planet orbiting an orange star, 2 unlikely friends continued to heal from the wounds that the galaxy had inflicted upon them, proving that compassion could survive even in the darkest corners of civilized space. The planet that Marcus Chen and Kira would come to call home had once been known as New Geneva, a prosperous agricultural colony that had been abandoned during the border wars 20 years earlier. Its terraforming had been nearly complete when the evacuation order came, leaving behind a world that could support human life but was marked as uninhabitable in all official databases due to supposed contamination from the conflict. Marcus discovered the truth about the contamination within hours of landing their stolen shuttle on the planet's surface. There was none. The evacuation had been precautionary, based on long-range sensor readings that suggested possible biological warfare. By the time follow-up surveys could be conducted, the war had moved to other sectors, and New Geneva had simply been forgotten. What remained was a world of rolling grasslands, clear rivers, and abandoned settlements that spoke of lives interrupted rather than lives destroyed. The colonists had left in a hurry, taking only essential personal items. Everything else remained. Homes with furniture still in place, vehicles in working condition, and most importantly, automated agricultural systems that had continued operating for 2 decades without human oversight. Marcus spent his first week on the planet in a state of physical collapse. The metabolic strain of maintaining neural synchronization with Kira during their 3 days aboard the Righteous Fury had pushed his body far beyond its limits. Dr. Melith's medical supplies kept him alive during the worst of it, but recovery was slow and painful. Kira proved to be a more capable caretaker than anyone might have expected. Her species, which Marcus learned to call the Very from the few words she knew in Galactic Standard, possessed an intuitive understanding of biological systems that bordered on the supernatural. She seemed to know exactly which medicines would help, which foods would provide the nutrition Marcus needed, and when to push him to move and when to let him rest. It was during the 2nd week that Marcus began to understand the true extent of what the galaxy had done to both their peoples. Kira's story emerged slowly, communicated through a mixture of broken galactic standard, crude drawings, and emotional impressions that she somehow managed to convey directly to his mind. She was indeed a child, roughly equivalent to a human 12-year-old, and she was the sole survivor of her family's attempt to escape persecution on her homeworld of Var Prime. The Veri had made the mistake of being naturally telepathic in a galaxy that feared mental abilities. When the Galactic Council discovered their telepathic capabilities during first contact, they had been immediately classified as a potential threat to galactic security. The official policy called for protective isolation until proper safeguards could be developed. In practice, this had meant forced relocation to controlled reservations where Vari families were separated and their children subjected to experimental procedures designed to suppress their natural abilities. Kira's parents had fled with their daughter rather than subject her to the Council's rehabilitation programs. They had made it as far as the border systems before being intercepted by Council enforcement ships. Her parents had been killed in the capture attempt. Kira had been taken into custody, but the trauma of watching her parents die had left her in the violent, defensive state that Marcus had first encountered. Marcus shared his own story as his strength returned. He told her about Earth, about the human colonies that had stretched across dozens of worlds before the Council decided that humanity's territorial expansion posed a threat to established species. He told her about the systematic destruction of human settlements, always justified as necessary responses to human aggression. He told her about the processing centers where captured humans were mentally conditioned to become docile service workers for other species. But most importantly, he told her about the resistance networks that still operated in the outer systems, helping human refugees find safe havens beyond the Council's reach. "We're not the only ones," he said one evening as they sat watching the sunset from the porch of the farmhouse they had claimed as their home. "There are others like us, scattered across the galaxy. People who refuse to accept that survival means giving up everything that makes us who we are." Kira, who had learned enough galactic standard to communicate in simple sentences, looked up at him with eyes that held far too much wisdom for someone her age. "You think we find them? Maybe. Or maybe we create something here that's worth finding." The planet offered resources that neither of them had expected. The abandoned colonial infrastructure included not only agricultural systems, but also manufacturing facilities, communication arrays, and transportation networks. Most importantly, the planet's isolation and official status as uninhabitable made it unlikely that they would be discovered by Council patrols. Over the following months, Marcus and Kira worked together to understand and restore the colonial systems. Marcus's background as an engineer proved invaluable in repairing and modifying equipment, while Kira's telepathic abilities allowed her to interface directly with computerized systems in ways that amazed and sometimes frightened him. Your species wasn't just naturally telepathic, Marcus realized one day as he watched Kira communicate with the automated agricultural systems through direct mental contact. You were technologically integrated telepaths. Your people designed systems that respond to thought rather than physical interface. Kira nodded sadly. Vade and machines work together. Council say this dangerous. Say we control computers to hurt others. But that's not what you were doing, was it? No. Bari make machines happy. Machines work better when they feel understood. The concept of making machines happy was foreign to anything in Marcus's experience, but he couldn't argue with the results. Under Kira's influence, the colonial systems began operating with efficiency levels that exceeded their original specifications. Crops grew faster and stronger, manufacturing systems produced higher quality materials, and even the weather control systems seemed to respond to her presence. It was during their 4th month on the planet that they encountered their first sign that they weren't as alone as they had believed. Marcus was working on expanding the communication array when the system picked up a transmission from deep space. It was coded in a pattern he recognized, the same type of encryption that human resistance cells use to communicate across galactic sectors. Unknown station, this is the transport vessel Freedom's Dream. We are carrying refugees seeking safe harbor. Can you provide assistance? Marcus looked at Kira, who had sensed the emotional content of the transmission through her telepathic abilities. They're scared, she said quietly. And hungry, and there are children. The decision to respond was surprisingly easy. Marcus activated the communication array and sent a reply using resistance protocols that would identify him as friendly to human refugees without revealing their location to potential council monitors. Freedom's Dream, this is Sanctuary Station. We can provide assistance. Transmitting coordinates for safe approach. 3 days later, the battered cargo ship landed in the field adjacent to their farmhouse. Its occupants were a mixture of species that Marcus had never expected to see traveling together. Humans, yes, but also several Cretae, a family of insectoid thresh, and 2 beings that appeared to be from the same species as Kira. The ship's captain was a human woman named Sarah Martinez, who had been running refugee operations for 7 years. Her crew included Dr. Elena Vasquez, a human physician who had been conducting clandestine medical research on the effects of council rehabilitation techniques, and Commander Thekler, a Cretae who had been court-martialed for refusing to participate in the bombardment of a human colony. "We'd been looking for a place like this for years," Sarah explained as they gathered in the farmhouse kitchen that evening. "Somewhere off the grid, with the resources to support long-term settlement. Most refugee operations are focused on short-term survival." "What made you risk coming here?" Marcus asked. "Intelligence reports," Dr. Tapersa Vasquez answered. "We've been monitoring council communications, and there have been references to a detention ship that reported prisoner escapes during an emergency situation. The ship was commanded by someone named Zexai, who our sources suggest might be sympathetic to refugee causes." Marcus and Kira exchanged glances. They had never learned what happened to Commander Zexai after their escape, but it was reassuring to know that her small act of mercy had been noticed by others. "More importantly," Sarah continued, "we've been tracking a pattern of council ships avoiding the system entirely. Whatever official designation this planet has, it's keeping the patrols away." Theklar, whose translator made his clicking speech understandable to the group, added his own perspective. "The council maintains power through fear and isolation. They convince each species that they are alone in their suffering, that resistance is hopeless. But what I see here suggests something different." He gestured toward Kira, who was sitting beside Marcus with a contentment that would have seemed impossible during her traumatized state aboard the Righteous Fury. "A very child and a human engineer working together, achieving things that neither could accomplish alone. This is what the Council fears most." Over the following weeks, the refugees integrated into the growing community that Marcus and Kira had begun to establish. Dr. Vasquez set up a medical facility in one of the abandoned buildings, discovering that the planet's biological environment was not only safe but actually beneficial for a wide range of species. The Thresh family, with their natural talent for biotechnology, began developing improved agricultural techniques that could support a much larger population. The Cretae refugees used their engineering skills to expand the manufacturing facilities, but it was the other Vari refugees who provided the most profound revelations about what their community could become. The 2 Vari adults, Melara and Thekvos, were among the few survivors of the Council's protective isolation programs. They had endured years of mental conditioning designed to suppress their telepathic abilities, but unlike most of their people, they had retained some connection to their natural gifts. "What the Council did not understand," Melara explained to Marcus through Kira's translation, "is that Vari telepathy is not individual ability. It is collective consciousness. When they separated our families, they broke the network that made us who we were. But Kira seems to have retained her abilities," Marcus observed. "Because you provided anchor," Thekvos replied. "Human emotional resonance, strong enough to replace broken family bonds. Very unusual. Very powerful. This led to an experiment that would change everything about how the refugee community understood itself." With Marcus acting as an emotional anchor, the 3 Vari began attempting to re-establish the telepathic network that connected their people. The process was difficult and sometimes painful, as they had to overcome years of conditioning and trauma. But when it worked, the results were extraordinary. The Vari network didn't just restore their natural abilities, it expanded them. With Marcus providing emotional stability and the other refugees contributing their own psychological resources, the network began incorporating non-Vari consciousness into its collective awareness, not telepathy in the traditional sense, but something deeper, a shared emotional and intellectual understanding that transcended species barriers. Dr. Vasquez documented the phenomenon with scientific rigor that amazed even her. "What you've achieved here isn't just telepathic communication," she reported. "You've created a form of collective intelligence that enhances individual capabilities without suppressing personal identity. The practical applications were stunning. Problems that would have taken weeks to solve individually could be addressed in hours by the networked community. Engineering challenges, agricultural optimization, medical research, everything proceeded with an efficiency that seemed almost miraculous. But more importantly, the network eliminated the isolation and fear that had defined their experiences as refugees. For the first time since fleeing their homes, they were not alone." Word of the community began to spread to resistance networks across the galaxy. Not through official communications, which could be monitored, but through the kind of coded messages and subtle hints that refugees had learned to recognize. Ships began arriving monthly, then weekly, bringing people who had heard whispers of a place where different species could work together without fear. Each new arrival brought skills and knowledge that strengthened the community. A group of human scientists contributed research on sustainable technology. Kretai engineers shared techniques for building structures that could withstand extreme weather. Thresh biotechnicians developed medical treatments that worked across species lines. Within a year, what had begun as a simple farming community had evolved into something that resembled a small city. But it was unlike any city that had existed in galactic civilization. The buildings were designed to accommodate the needs of multiple species. The technology incorporated both traditional engineering and very biointegration. The social structure was based on consensus decision-making through the expanded telepathic network. Most remarkably, it worked. Crime was virtually non-existent, not because of law enforcement, but because the network made it impossible to hide harmful intentions from the community. Conflicts were resolved through shared understanding rather than power struggles. Resources were distributed based on need rather than wealth or status. Marcus often found himself reflecting on the irony of their situation. The Galaxy Council had justified its persecution of humans in Veri by claiming that both species posed threats to civilized order. Yet here, working together, they had created the most genuinely peaceful and productive society he had ever experienced. "They were right to fear us," Kira observed one evening, as they watched the city lights twinkle in the valley below their original farmhouse. Her galactic standard had improved dramatically, and her telepathic abilities allowed her to communicate complex concepts with remarkable precision. "How do you mean?" Marcus asked. "Humans and Veri together are dangerous to their kind of civilization. We show that cooperation is stronger than control, that diversity is stronger than uniformity. That compassion is stronger than fear," Marcus nodded, understanding the deeper implications. Their little community wasn't just a refugee settlement. It was a proof of concept for an entirely different way of organizing galactic society. And proof of concepts had a way of spreading to places where the established order preferred them not to go. "They'll find us eventually," he said quietly. "Yes," Kira agreed. "But by then, we'll be ready." She was right, of course. The network had shown them possibilities that went far beyond simple survival. If they could create this kind of society on one planet, they could create it on others. If they could demonstrate that cooperation between species was not only possible but superior to the Council's authoritarian model, other communities would follow their example. The revolution wouldn't be fought with weapons or armies, it would be fought with example, with proof that the galaxy's most persecuted peoples could build something better than what their oppressors had created. As Marcus looked out over the community that had grown from his desperate decision to show kindness to a frightened child, he realized that Commander Zexai had been wrong about one thing. They hadn't found sanctuary in this hidden corner of space. They had built the foundation for something much larger. They had built hope. And hope, as any dictator could attest, was the most dangerous weapon of all. 2 years after their escape from the righteous fury, Marcus Chen stood in the command center of what had once been New Geneva's administrative complex, watching displays that showed the positions of 17 ships in orbit around their planet. Not Council enforcement vessels, but refugee transports, research ships, and supply runners that had found their way to the hidden community through an underground network that now spanned half the galaxy. The transformation had been remarkable. What had begun as a desperate attempt to survive had evolved into something that challenged every assumption about how different species could coexist. The city now housed over 30,000 beings, representing 47 different species, many of which had never interacted peacefully in recorded galactic history. At the center of it all was the network that Kira had helped establish. The very telepathic collective had grown beyond anything their species had achieved in isolation, incorporating not just the emotional and intellectual resources of multiple species, but their technological capabilities as well. Human innovation, Kretai engineering precision, Thresh biological expertise, and dozens of other specialized knowledge bases had merged into a problem-solving capability that seemed to border on prescience. Dr. Vasquez had spent months studying the phenomenon, publishing papers that were circulated through resistance networks across the galaxy. Her research suggested that the network represented a new stage in the evolution of consciousness itself, not just individual intelligence enhanced by technology, but collective intelligence that transcended the limitations of both biology and artificial systems. "Marcus," Kira's voice reached him through the network's shared awareness, carrying overtones of urgency that made him immediately alert. She was in the orbital monitoring station, tracking the approach of a ship that had appeared at the system's edge an hour earlier. "What do we have?" he asked, both aloud and through the network connection that had become as natural as breathing. "Single ship, Council configuration, but modified. It's transmitting resistance codes, but there's something else." Her mental voice carried puzzles and concern in equal measure. "The ship's energy signature matches a vessel that's been in our database for years. Marcus felt the network's collective attention focus on the approaching vessel as dozens of minds began analyzing the sensor data. What they found was disturbing and promising in equal measure. The ship was the Righteous Fury. Commander Zex High breathed Dr. Vasquez, who had joined the monitoring station when the alerts went out. After 2 years, she's found us. Marcus felt the network's emotions shift as different members processed this information. Fear from those who had been persecuted by Council forces. Curiosity from the scientists who wanted to understand why an enforcement ship would approach using resistance codes. Hope from those who had heard stories about the commander who had allowed their escape. But it was Kira's emotional response that surprised him most. Through the network, he could sense not fear or anger, but something that resembled anticipation. "She's not here to capture us," Kira said with certainty that seemed to come from sources beyond normal analysis. "There are many others, and they're not prisoners." The Righteous Fury entered orbit an hour later, followed by 2 cargo vessels and a medical ship that bore Creatai markings. Marcus authorized communications, and within minutes he found himself looking at a holographic image of Commander Zexai that showed remarkable changes from their last encounter. The rigid military bearing was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. Her scaled features carried stress lines that spoke of months spent in difficult decisions, but her eyes held a clarity that hadn't been present during their first meeting. "Marcus Chen," she said formally, then paused and added with what might have been humor, "I hope you're prepared for visitors. Commander Zexai, this is unexpected. Much has changed since our last encounter. I have approximately 800 beings aboard these ships who are seeking sanctuary. I was hoping you might have room for a few more refugees. 800. Marcus felt the network process this information, calculating housing requirements, resource allocation, and integration challenges. But beneath the practical considerations, he sensed something else. Excitement at the prospect of incorporating so many new perspectives and capabilities into their growing collective. "Commander, may I ask how you found us?" "The same way everyone else has," Zexai replied, "through stories." 2 years ago, rumors began circulating through resistance networks about a community where different species had learned to work together without conflict. Those rumors became legends. And those legends became navigation beacons for people who had nowhere else to go. She paused, and her expression became more serious.
"Marcus, what you've built here has become a symbol."
"The Council has noticed, and they're not pleased." This was the news that Marcus had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. The network had been tracking Council communications for months, noting increased patrol activity in nearby sectors and intelligence-gathering operations that seemed focused on locating hidden settlements. "How much time do we have?" he asked. "Unknown, but I've brought information that might help." Zexai activated a data transmission that began flooding their systems with intelligence files, star charts, and personnel records. 3 months ago, I resigned my commission and convinced my crew to join me. We've been conducting reconnaissance operations in Council space, documenting their enforcement activities. Marcus felt the network's analytical capabilities engage with the incoming data. What they found was sobering. The Council had identified their planet's location through traffic analysis, tracking the patterns of ships that had disappeared from normal space lanes and correlating those disappearances with areas of suspected resistance activity. "They know we're here," Dr. Vasquez observed as she reviewed the intelligence files. "They just don't know exactly what we are yet, but they're planning to find out," Zexai confirmed. "I estimate you have perhaps 6 months before they mount a reconnaissance mission, maybe a year before they decide on a response." Through the network, Marcus could sense the community processing this threat, not with panic or despair, but with the kind of calm determination that had allowed them to survive this long. They had always known this day would come. The question was whether they would run or fight. "Commander," Marcus said carefully, "your intelligence suggests that the Council is planning more than just reconnaissance. They're preparing for what they call a comprehensive solution to the refugee problem." Zexai confirmed grimly. "The current policy of capture and rehabilitation has been deemed insufficient. The new directive calls for direct action against any settlement that provides sanctuary to designated hostile species." Direct action. Marcus had learned to decode Council euphemisms during his years as a refugee. Direct action meant bombardment from orbit. It meant the complete extermination of everyone on the planet. "How many ships?" Kira asked, her voice carrying through the communication link with crystal clarity. "At minimum, a full enforcement fleet. 24 heavy cruisers with support vessels. Enough firepower to sterilize the planet's surface." The network fell silent as its collective consciousness processed this information. 24 heavy cruisers represented more military power than any resistance cell had ever successfully opposed. Traditional defensive strategies would be hopeless. But the community that had grown around Marcus and Kira was far from traditional. "Commander," Marcus said after several minutes of network consultation, "I'd like to invite you and your people to join us on the surface. There are some things you need to see before we discuss our options." 6 hours later, Commander Zexahai stood in the central plaza of what the community had begun calling Haven City, watching demonstrations that challenged everything she thought she knew about galactic civilization. A group of Thresh biotechnicians were working with human engineers to modify atmospheric processors, creating hybrid technologies that operated with efficiency levels that should have been impossible. Crete children played games with Vera youngsters that transcended language barriers. Former council personnel worked alongside refugee scientists on research projects that combined multiple species' approaches to fundamental problems, but it was the network itself that truly amazed her. "May I?" Kira asked, extending her hand toward the commander's scaled palm. Zexai hesitated, then made contact. The experience was unlike anything in her previous existence. Not the violent mental intrusion she had expected from telepathic contact, but something infinitely gentler and more profound. For a brief moment, she could sense the interconnected awareness that bound the community together. Thousands of individual minds working in harmony while maintaining their unique perspectives and personalities. "By the depths," she whispered in her people's ancient language, "this is what you've created here." "Not created," Kira corrected gently. "Discovered. This is what species can become when they're not forced to compete for survival." Through the network connection, Zexai could sense the community's collective knowledge and capabilities. Engineering projects that would take traditional teams months to complete were finished in weeks. Scientific research proceeded at speeds that seemed to defy the limitations of individual intelligence. Social problems that had plagued galactic civilization for centuries were resolved through consensus and shared understanding. "The Council fears this because they know what it means," Marcus explained as the network connection faded. "This isn't just a refugee settlement. It's proof that their entire system of control is unnecessary. More than that," added Dr. Podcast. Vasquez, who had been documenting the integration of Zexai's refugees into the community, "It's proof that their system is actively harmful. Every species in the galaxy could achieve this level of cooperation and productivity if they weren't forced to compete within the Council's hierarchical structure." Commander Zexai spent the next 3 days touring the city, observing the integration process and participating in network sessions that gradually incorporated her own experiences and knowledge into the collective understanding. By the end of that time, she had made a decision that would have seemed impossible during her years as a council officer. "I want to help you prepare for what's coming," she announced during a community gathering in the Central Plaza. "Not just as a military advisor, but as a full member of this community." The process of full network integration took several weeks, as Zexai's mind adapted to the collective consciousness while retaining her individual identity. But when it was complete, the community's capabilities expanded dramatically. Through her memories and experiences, the network gained access to detailed knowledge of Council military tactics, fleet compositions, and strategic planning processes. More importantly, they gained insight into the political dynamics that drove Council decision-making. "They're not acting from strength," Zexai explained during the strategy session, attended by both physical representatives and network-connected minds. "The refugee problem has become a significant political issue within the Council. Too many resources devoted to enforcement, too many questions about the morality of current policies." "Then why escalate to direct action?" asked Sarah Martinez, whose transport operation had become the coordination hub for resistance communications. "Because this community represents an existential threat to their authority," Zexai replied. "Not military, but ideological. If word spreads that different species can coexist peacefully and prosperously without Council oversight, it undermines the fundamental justification for their power." Marcus felt the network's collective understanding crystallize around this insight. They weren't just facing a military threat. They were facing the desperate actions of a political system that could not allow alternatives to exist. "Then we need to make sure word spreads," he said quietly. "If they're going to attack us anyway, we should make certain that our example reaches as many people as possible before they do." What followed was 3 months of the most intensive preparation any community in galactic history had ever undertaken. Not just military preparation, though the network's collective intelligence proved remarkably effective at developing defensive strategies. More importantly, they prepared to ensure their legacy would survive even if they did not. Teams of researchers documented every aspect of their society, from the technical specifications of their hybrid technologies to the social structures that had made their cooperation possible. Communication networks that had carried refugee traffic for years were repurposed to distribute this information throughout the galaxy. Hidden data caches were established on dozens of worlds, ensuring that the knowledge of what they had achieved would survive any attempt to destroy them. But the network's most ambitious project was something that had never been attempted before: the creation of a backup system that could preserve the collective consciousness itself. "We're not just preserving information," explained Dr. Vasquez as she led the development of the consciousness transfer protocols. "We're preserving the actual shared awareness that makes this community function. If we succeed, the network can be recreated anywhere that enough of our people survive." The technical challenges were enormous. Mapping and storing the neural patterns of thousands of networked minds required computing resources that pushed their systems to their limits. But the network's collective problem-solving abilities proved equal to the challenge, developing solutions that individual species could never have achieved alone. As the months passed and Council patrol activity increased in nearby systems, the community continued to grow and evolve. New refugees arrived weekly, bringing skills and perspectives that strengthened the network. Former Council personnel, inspired by Zex's example, began defecting in increasing numbers. Entire families of Vari refugees, rescued from the isolation programs, integrated into the collective consciousness and helped expand its capabilities. By the time Council reconnaissance ships finally appeared at the system's edge, Haven City housed over 50,000 beings, and the network encompassed nearly 100 different species. What had begun as Marcus's desperate decision to show kindness to a traumatized child had become the largest multi-species collective in galactic history. "They're here," Kira announced, through the network as the sensors detected the familiar energy signatures of Council enforcement vessels. 12 ships, holding position at maximum sensor range. Marcus felt the network's collective awareness focus on the approaching threat. 50,000 minds working in harmony began analyzing every aspect of the situation, from the ship's technical specifications to the probable intentions of their commanders. But what the network discovered was not what anyone had expected. The reconnaissance fleet wasn't preparing for immediate attack. They were observing, gathering data, transmitting reports back to Council headquarters. Most remarkably, their communications showed signs of internal disagreement about how to proceed. "Commander," came a transmission from the lead Council ship, "this is Fleet Admiral Koreth Versus. I am authorized to negotiate the peaceful relocation of all non-hostile beings currently on the planet's surface." Through Zexai's knowledge of Council politics, the network understood the significance of this offer. Negotiation was not typically part of Council enforcement protocols. Someone in the hierarchy had decided that direct action might be more costly than originally anticipated. Marcus activated the community's communication array. "Admiral Koreth Vizez, this is Marcus Chen, speaking for the Haven City community. We appreciate the offer, but we found the location to our liking. Mr. Chen, you are harboring beings designated as hostile to galactic security. This cannot be permitted to continue." "Admiral, we're harboring beings who have been designated as inconvenient to galactic politics. There's a significant difference." The exchange continued for several hours, with both sides carefully probing the other's intentions and capabilities. What became clear was that the Council was facing political pressure to resolve the refugee situation without creating martyrs that might inspire further resistance. "They're afraid," Zexai observed through the network. "Not of our military capabilities, but of what we represent. They know that attacking a peaceful community will create exactly the kind of galactic outcry they've been trying to avoid." "Then we have an opportunity," Marcus replied. "Not just to survive, but to change the entire nature of this conflict." What the network proposed was audacious beyond anything attempted in galactic history. Instead of hiding their achievements or defending them through force, they would openly demonstrate the superiority of their cooperative model to anyone willing to observe. "Admiral," Marcus transmitted to the Council fleet, "we invite you and your officers to visit our community. See for yourselves what we've accomplished here. Judge whether what we've built poses a threat to galactic security or offers a solution to problems that have plagued civilization for centuries." The invitation hung in space for nearly an hour before Admiral Koreth responded. "Mr. Chen, Council protocols do not permit unsecured contact with hostile settlements." "Then perhaps it's time for the Council to develop new protocols," Marcus suggested, unless of course they're afraid that their officers might see something that challenges their assumptions about what civilization can achieve. It was a calculated gamble, appealing to the professional pride that military officers maintained even within authoritarian systems. Zexhi's memories. The network knew that Admiral Carethus had built his career on successful negotiations rather than military victories. The challenge would appeal to him on multiple levels. "Very well," came the response 6 hours later. "I will permit a limited observation mission. 3 officers, escort provided by your people, duration not to exceed 1 planetary rotation." The network's response to this decision was immediate and comprehensive. In 12 hours, they prepared a demonstration of their capabilities that would fundamentally alter the Admiral's understanding of what they were observing. Admiral Carethus and his 2 escorts landed in Haven City to find a community that bore no resemblance to the refugee camp they had expected. The infrastructure was more advanced than most Council worlds, incorporating technologies that represented the best achievements of dozens of species working in harmony. The social organization was completely peaceful, with no visible security forces or authoritarian controls, but it was the network demonstration that truly captured their attention. The Admiral was invited to witness a real-time problem-solving session where the community addressed a technical challenge that had emerged in their orbital manufacturing systems. 50,000 minds focused on the problem simultaneously, sharing knowledge and perspectives across species lines, developing and testing solutions with a speed and creativity that seemed impossible. "How long would this type of analysis typically require using standard Council procedures?" Marcus asked the Admiral as they watched the demonstration. "For a problem of this complexity with this many variables," Admiral Carethus paused, consulting his aide's calculations. 6 months, minimum. Probably longer. The network solved it in 47 minutes, Kira observed. "And the solution integrates improvements that none of our species would have discovered working alone." The Admiral's aide, a young Kretai officer named Vethmar, was frantically documenting everything he observed. "Admiral, the efficiency levels they're achieving are beyond anything in our databases. If these capabilities could be replicated across Council space, the galaxy would change overnight," Admiral Carethus finished quietly. "Economic productivity would increase by orders of magnitude. Resource conflicts would become unnecessary. Most of the tensions that require military intervention would simply disappear." "That's the idea," Marcus said simply. The remainder of the Admiral's visit was spent in deep discussions about the political implications of what they were observing. Through the network, the community shared detailed analyses of how their cooperative model could be implemented in existing Council territories without destabilizing current governments. "You're not proposing revolution," Admiral Carethus realized during their final meeting. "You're proposing evolution." "We're proposing survival," Marcus corrected. "The galaxy is facing challenges that no individual species can solve alone. Resource depletion, population growth, technological stagnation. The competitive model that the Council enforces might have worked when the galaxy was smaller and less complex, but it's actively counterproductive now." "And you believe this network model can address these challenges?" "We know it can," Kira interjected, "because we're already doing it. Everything you've seen here, the technology integration, the resource efficiency, the social cooperation, scales up to any size population." Admiral Carethus departed with a promise to deliver a complete report to the Council leadership. But more importantly, he left with the understanding that the community represented not a threat to be eliminated, but an opportunity to be embraced. The network's collective consciousness had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had transformed a military confrontation into a diplomatic opportunity and a refugee crisis into a demonstration of humanity's potential for positive change. But as the Council fleet departed and life in Haven City returned to normal, Marcus and Kira both understood that their greatest challenge was still ahead. They had shown the galaxy what was possible. Now they had to convince civilized space to abandon everything they thought they knew about how different species should interact. The revolution was no longer coming. It had arrived, carried in the minds of Council officers who had seen proof that cooperation was stronger than control, that diversity was more valuable than uniformity, and that the galaxy's greatest problems could only be solved when its people worked together instead of competing for dominance. Change would not come quickly or easily, but it would come. The network had made sure of that. 5 years after Admiral Carethus delivered his report to the Galactic Council, Marcus Chen stood on the observation deck of the orbital station that now served as the diplomatic hub for the Haven Coalition. Through the transparent aluminum, he could see ships from 47 different worlds maintaining peaceful formations around the planet that had become the symbol of a new age in galactic civilization. The transformation had not been immediate or easy. Admiral Carethus's report had triggered the greatest political crisis in Council history, splitting the governing body between those who saw the network model as an existential threat and those who recognized it as the solution to problems that had plagued the galaxy for centuries. The debate had raged for months in council chambers, while throughout galactic space, word of Haven City spread through channels that no authority could control. Scientists shared research data that proved the network's technological achievements. Refugees spoke of communities where different species worked together without conflict. Even council personnel began questioning the assumptions that had guided their enforcement policies. The breaking point had come when 3 council-member worlds declared independence and requested assistance in implementing their own network-based governments. The military response ordered by the council hardliners had been met not with armed resistance but with something far more powerful, passive resistance, supported by networking technology that made traditional control mechanisms ineffective. "You can't conquer an idea whose time has come," Kira had observed as they watched the unsuccessful attempts to suppress the growing coalition, especially when that idea makes life better for everyone involved. The young Vadier, now approaching the equivalent of human adulthood, had become the primary architect of the network expansion protocols. Her unique position as the bridge between human emotional intelligence and very telepathic capabilities had proven essential in adapting the collective consciousness model to species with different neurological structures. Today, the network encompassed over 200 worlds and continued to grow daily. But more importantly, it had fundamentally changed how galactic civilization understood cooperation, governance, and the relationship between individual identity and collective achievement. Marcus activated his personal communicator to connect with the diplomatic session taking place in the station's main conference hall. Representatives from every major species in the galaxy had gathered to formalize the agreements that would reshape the fundamental structure of interstellar law. "The final vote tally is unanimous," announced Ambassador Theklar, the former Cretan military officer who had become one of the Coalition's most effective negotiators. "The Galactic Cooperation Accord has been ratified by all participating governments. The accord represented 3 years of negotiations that had fundamentally redefined the relationship between species throughout the galaxy. Instead of the hierarchical control structure that the Council had maintained, the new system was based on voluntary cooperation, shared resources, and collective decision-making through expanded network consciousness." "Marcus," came Kira's voice through both his communicator and the network link that connected every member of the Coalition. "The ceremony is beginning. They're waiting for your address." He made his way to the main conference hall, where representatives from worlds across the galaxy had gathered to witness the formal dissolution of the old order and the establishment of something unprecedented in galactic history. The room buzzed with conversations in dozens of languages, but beneath the verbal communication, Marcus could sense the shared awareness that connected most of the attendees through various levels of network integration. Commander Zexai, now serving as the Coalition's security coordinator, approached him as he entered the hall. Her scaled features showed the contentment that came from work that aligned with personal values rather than external orders. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, gesturing toward the podium, where he would deliver the address that officially established the new galactic government. "As ready as anyone can be for ending one age of history and beginning another," Marcus replied with a slight smile. The irony was not lost on either of them. The man who would speak for a new model of galactic civilization was a former refugee who had been marked for extermination by the system he was now replacing. The commander who would enforce the peace was someone who had risked everything to allow 2 prisoners to escape. Marcus took the podium to an audience that represented the greatest concentration of interstellar political power in recorded history. But what struck him most was not the formal authority present in the room, but the sense of shared purpose that connected beings who had spent centuries viewing each other as competitors or threats. 5 years ago, he began, a traumatized child and a broken refugee found each other in the detention bay of a council enforcement ship. Neither of us expected to survive our encounter with galactic justice. Neither of us imagined that our friendship would challenge the fundamental assumptions about how civilized beings should relate to each other. He paused, allowing the translation systems to convey his words to species whose languages had evolved in environments completely unlike Earth. But more importantly, he allowed the network to share the emotional context that made mere words insufficient to convey the full meaning of what he was describing. What we learned during our imprisonment, our escape, and our years building a new kind of community is that the universe is vast enough for cooperation to replace competition, diverse enough for difference to strengthen rather than threaten us, and beautiful enough that no one should have to face it alone. Through the network, he could sense the emotional response of beings whose species had been enemies for centuries, who were now working together on projects that benefited every member of the Coalition. Former slaves and former masters, hunters and prey, conquerors and conquered, all connected by the understanding that their individual survival and flourishing was enhanced rather than threatened by the success of others. The Galactic Council justified its authority by claiming that different species could not coexist without central control. They maintained order by ensuring that everyone remained too weak to challenge their power. What we have proven here, what we celebrate today, is that their assumptions were not only wrong, but actively harmful to the civilization they claimed to protect. Dr. Vasquez, now serving as the Coalition's chief science officer, had compiled statistics that demonstrated the practical benefits of network-based cooperation. Technological advancement that had stagnated under competitive systems was proceeding at unprecedented rates. Resource conflicts that had driven interstellar wars were being resolved through shared analysis and coordinated development. Even population growth, which many species had seen as an existential threat, was being transformed into an advantage through networked resource management. The network doesn't eliminate individual identity, Marcus continued, addressing one of the most common concerns about the coalition model. It enhances it. Every person who joins our collective consciousness contributes their unique perspective, their specialized knowledge, their individual creativity to a shared understanding that makes all of us more than we could ever be alone. He gestured toward Kira, who had joined him on the platform. Her presence served as a living reminder of how far they had all come from the fear and isolation that had once defined interstellar relations. This young woman was once so traumatized by the cruelty of civilization that she attacked anyone who approached her. Today, she serves as the primary architect of consciousness-sharing protocols that have connected billions of minds across hundreds of worlds. Her transformation is our transformation. Her healing is our healing. Her hope for a better galaxy has become our reality. The formal ratification ceremony continued for several hours as each member world officially committed to the principles of the Galactic Cooperation Accord. But the real celebration took place in the network itself, where the collective consciousness experienced something unprecedented, the shared joy of billions of beings who no longer had to fear each other. Later that evening, Marcus and Kira stood together on the observation deck where this day had begun, watching the ships of the new coalition maintaining their peaceful formations around the world that had started everything. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't escaped from the righteous fury?" Kira asked, her voice carrying through the network connection that had linked them for so many years. "Sometimes," Marcus admitted, "but not often. What matters is what actually happened." "Which was?" Marcus considered the question, looking out at the stars that now represented not threats or obstacles, but opportunities for continued growth and discovery. The galaxy was still vast, still dangerous in many ways, still filled with challenges that would require everything the Coalition could offer. What happened was that two people who had been broken by an unjust system found each other and decided to try something different. What happened was that they discovered they weren't as alone as they had thought. What happened was that compassion turned out to be more powerful than fear. Cooperation turned out to be more effective than competition, and hope turned out to be more realistic than despair. Through the network, he could sense the agreement of beings across hundreds of worlds who had lived through their own versions of trauma and recovery, isolation and connection, fear and hope. The abused cub learned to trust again, Kira observed with a smile. And the silent human learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to give up on someone who has given up on themselves. Marcus nodded, remembering the desperate weeks aboard the enforcement ship when maintaining calm had required every ounce of strength he possessed. It had seemed like such a small thing at the time, just sitting quietly and refusing to add his own fear to the terror that surrounded a traumatized child. Yet that simple act of compassion had somehow grown into the foundation for a new kind of galactic civilization. "The galaxy is still healing," he said quietly. "There are still worlds where the old ways persist, still people who believe that strength comes from dominating others rather than cooperating with them. The work isn't finished." "No," Kira agreed. "But it's begun. And once people see that there's a better way, it becomes harder and harder to convince them to accept the worse way." The Coalition continued to grow not through conquest or coercion, but through example. Worlds that joined the network experienced immediate benefits: technological advancement, social cooperation, and the end of the isolation that had characterized so much of galactic history. More importantly, the network model was proving adaptable to species and cultures that had seemed incompatible with any form of cooperative government. The collective consciousness could accommodate wildly different approaches to problem-solving, social organization, and even basic concepts like individuality and privacy. "We've proven something important," Marcus observed as they watched a new group of ships arrive from a system that had just voted to join the Coalition. "We've proven that the universe is big enough for everyone. That difference doesn't have to mean conflict. That survival doesn't require conquest." The ships maintained their peaceful formation as new arrivals were integrated into the traffic patterns around Haven City. Each vessel carried beings who had made the decision to reject the competitive model that had dominated galactic civilization for centuries, choosing instead to trust in cooperation, shared resources, and mutual support. Humans have a saying, Marcus continued. It takes a village to raise a child. What we've discovered is that sometimes it takes a traumatized child to teach a galaxy how to become a village. Kira's laughter rippled through the network, carrying joy to beings across hundreds of worlds who shared in the understanding of how far they had all come from the fear and isolation that had once seemed inescapable. The transformation wasn't complete, would never be complete, as growth and change were fundamental to the network model. There would always be new challenges, new species to welcome, new problems that required the collective intelligence of diverse minds working in harmony, but the foundation had been laid. The proof of concept had been demonstrated. The galaxy had learned that cooperation was not only possible but preferable to the alternative. The network has a message for both of us, Kira said, her mental voice carrying overtones from thousands of connected minds. They want to know what we plan to do next. Marcus considered the question, feeling the patient attention of the collective consciousness as it waited for his response. There were exploration missions to plan, new colonies to establish, technological projects that would require the combined resources of multiple worlds. There were also diplomatic challenges, as species outside the coalition struggled to understand how their traditional competitive advantages could be maintained in a galaxy increasingly organized around cooperation. What do you think? He asked.
Ready for another adventure?
Kira's smile was visible both physically and through the network's emotional sharing. With you? Always. Together, they turned from the observation deck and made their way to the planning sessions where coalition representatives were designing the next phase of galactic evolution. Behind them, the stars continued their ancient dance, but now they illuminated a galaxy where beings no longer had to face the darkness alone. The abused cub had learned to trust, the silent human had learned to speak. And together, they had taught a galaxy how to sing in harmony with itself. The revolution was complete. The transformation had begun, and somewhere in the vast reaches of space, new refugees were looking up at the stars and daring to hope that they might find not just survival, but a place where they could finally, truly belong. The network would be waiting for them, as it would be waiting for everyone who chose cooperation over conquest, understanding over ignorance, and love over fear. The galaxy had learned, finally and forever, that no one had to carry their pain alone.